Good afternoon, everyone. If you can't hear me, tell me to talk louder because I tend to drift on my voice at times. What I hope to do today is give you an introduction to shipwrecks in the Thousand Islands and get everybody appreciation of what a unique set of vessels and history that's right on the water that most people are not aware of. This first picture, well, the video that we showed was a song written for a shipwreck display in the Clayton Thousand Island Museum by Peg Dolan. And those were all ships in that video that were in the Thousand Island shipwrecks. I started off with this picture. I want to talk about the Thousand Islands and the shipwrecks in there and why they're in there and what's unique about them. This comes from the Thousand Life magazine. Ian Corderson took it, and it shows the islands and the ships coming down the channel. The Thousand Islands and the St. Lawrence Seaway and all seaways before that, they're always close and compact. The ships are not distant from land, out in the lake somewhere where nobody can see them. And there's roughly 1,800 islands in the Thousand Islands. And we're talking about the area, mainly I'm going to show you from Tibbetts Point down to Dark Island. If you go all the way down to Messina, which is technically Upper St. Lawrence, there's about 75 shipwrecks in that area. In the Thousand Islands itself, on the American side alone, there's over 30 shipwrecks. So this is what we're talking about. Here's a map that shows you the concentration of shipwrecks. Shipwrecks are basically linear. Not surprising, they're located, concentrated around the navigation channel. This blue are U.S. shipwrecks, the red are Canadian shipwrecks. And you can see that they really line up down the river. The Thousand Islands are right in the main navigation channel from the ocean to the center of the United States, all the Great Lakes. Anything passing through goes into the lakes, goes through there. So if we look at a timeline, the Thousand Islands contain the oldest known shipwreck in the Great Lakes system. The Iroquois, 1761, was built in Maitland, Ontario, just across from Ivisburg. It also contains the newest diveable shipwreck, the Roy Jodrey, that went down in 1974. And ships from every period in between. Revolutionary War, War of 1812, Patriots War. There's all ships that have sunk there, and most of them are still there. Try to give you the uniqueness about this. This is a picture taken from the Thousand Island Bridge. The red dotted lines indicate the shipping channel, and you can see Rock Island Lighthouse in the background. If I add the shipwrecks to that picture, you'll find a whole, a cluster of shipwrecks. I mean, they're not spread all over the place. They're right there. Again, Iroquois, oldest identifiable shipwreck, and all either under or on the peripheral of the St. Lawrence Seaway. Now, diving on shipwrecks may be older than you realize. There's really been three periods that access to the shipwrecks have taken place by divers. The original period was the hard hat diver that started in the late 1800s. There were ships that were sunk and salvaged before 1900 in the Thousand Islands. There was diving operations, actually, a guy named Jelly out of Ogdensburg. And these ships would go down. They didn't leave the cargoes there. They were very valuable carriers. They organized the hard hat divers to go down and dive on these wrecks. Starting about 1960, after World War II, actually Cousteau invented the aqualung. Aqualung was an extremely inexpensive way of going diving versus the hard hat. If you look at the hard hat, there's a suit, there's a helmet, there's weights, there's a pumping station, big wheels, people on the surface, there's supply lines. Well, scuba diving, you bought a tank, bought a regulator, weight belt, and a snorkel, and that was it. You could now access water as deep as 130 feet. where the hard hat divers, it was very expensive, very difficult. So with the advent of scuba diving, lots of shipwrecks were found because now the average person that could get certified could now find a shipwreck. Now, about 2000, a new technology came up which was called tech diving, which was mixed gases, where you no longer breathe the same gases you have on the surface. You may have krypton and other gases actually mixed in. This will allow you not to have the normal diving diseases or problems related to compressed air and mixed gases. And now these type of diving can go over 400 feet. St. Lawrence is only 270, 80 feet. So any shipwreck now in the Thousand Islands is accessible by scuba divers. And that's the main thing that's happened, is you've had 3 stages of divers coming about. Now, as I said earlier, shipwrecks in the Thousand Islands didn't happen in isolation. When we were involved in the Lake Ontario Sanctuary, there was 42 shipwrecks in, I think, 14,000 square miles of Lake Ontario on this end. Thousand Island has 32 shipwrecks in about 40 square miles. So there's a tremendous density difference of how many shipwrecks. Plus people knew where they were. When something sunk or happened, it wasn't out in the lake somewhere in a storm, they had no idea where the ship went down. This is an example. In the 1920s, there's a powerboat that was hit by a tour boat at night. The boat sunk instantly. All 3 people on the boat drowned with it. They happened to belong to the Light family from Light Rollaway Bearing in Syracuse. The estate needed to recover the bodies in order to process the illegal ownerships. So this sunken part of the river right above Alexander Bay is 250 foot deep. There was no way to send hard hat divers down. So they took and utilized 2,000 sticks of dynamite thrown into the river to blow up, to open up the boats, the bodies could come to the surface and be found, of which only 2 were found. Today, divers now most likely found this wreck because they can go down to that depth. But ship sunk, it just wasn't left there. Something would happen to it. This is a photograph that was in the Thousand Island Museum that was just titled Raising the Dead from the Catherine, 1890. And if you look at this photograph, you see a guy with rope and cables over him. He's feeding cables to a hard-head diver, and you see one of the compressors up top where they're spinning the wheels, and they put divers down, and these were wives of railroad names. They were up for the summer, they get the same thing, the boat got hit, night sunk, so they had to recover the bodies. These were actually recovered by hard-head divers at the time. Now, that photograph, when the scuba diving came around, there happens to be a cottage and a shoal. That cottage is still there today. The shoal is still there today. So the divers, with their scuba gear, 1970s, they got the photograph, they went out, they held it up, looked over there, went down, they actually found the wreck. There was no record of where the wreck actually was or where it was recovered at the time. So information can be gleaned from old shipwrecks. Any ships that didn't sink, that were salvageable, were salvaged at the time. This is a picture of a vessel called the Ocano. They're loading bales of silk and other things off it. There was a packet steamer that went from Ogdensburg to Chicago, and apparently in the late 1890s there was the railroad came to Ogdensburg, was brought up and shipped a lot of goods out to the other lakes. This Ocano, coming up to the Narrows, it hit a shoal head-on, sunk, and it was salvaged what they could. This is an iron tug I'll talk about later. This was brought out to, there were salvage companies that just specialized in recovering goods from sunken ships. And while they were diving on it, it slipped off the shoal and dropped to the bottom. And they didn't get everything off it. There were several attempts later to recover it. Okay, sometimes when ships sunk, they brought a barge in and they just yanked them back up on the surface. This is a barge just sitting off Alexandria Bay, and it's got all these cables around a ship called the Islander. It was a steamer that pulled in. The Islander had just been refitted, had a brand new steam engine. It sunk, so they brought the ship in. And this is a 100-foot long ship. It lifted up off the bottom, took the steam engine out, took out deep water, dropped it to where it's still sitting today. They didn't leave things sitting around. There was another case where there was a ship sunk in the further up by the Thousand Island Bridge, and it sunk one year. They came out the next year and did the same thing, strapped around it. When it got to the surface, they took steam pumps, pumped all the water out of it, had it afloat, and by the time they got it back to Kingston, they went into Kingston Harbor on its own power after it had been sunk for a year. It's just amazing that what these people are capable of doing. Now, all shipwrecks aren't valued the same. There's, if you look at the National Register, there's historic shipwreck, which happens to be anything that sunk over 50 years ago. There's nationally significant historic shipwreck, which are much more involved in how you define what they are. They have to be tied to some event that had significance within the development of the United States. And there's actually 3 that can raise to that level that are still in the Thousand Islands. As I mentioned earlier, the Iroquois, 1759, sunk 61, the Haldeman sunk 1783, and the Sir Robert Peel sunk 1838. I'll start with a little bit on the Peel. The Peel was sunk in revenge for the British sinking the ship near Niagara Falls.
Caroline.
What's that?
Caroline.
Caroline. It's the time period of the Patriot Wars. There was an intent on the United States invading Canada, people here wanting to invade Canada. And out in Niagara Falls, or actually Buffalo, the Patriots were fitting out a ship to go across the river into Fort Erie. The British, seeing this, they came across, they did a preemptive strike, and they burned the Caroline. In revenge for us, Bill Johnson, that was one of the Patriots at the time, organized a bunch of people dressed as Indians, and they intercepted the Peel that was at dock on Wellesley Island being loaded with timber or wood. And the Peel was actually a packet steamer, and they had a number of wealthy people out there traveling out west. But Johnson went and they took all the money from the people on board. They set the Sir Robert Peel, which was built like a year before, on fire, pushed it out just above the Thousand Island Bridge and let it sunk. That became a big issue at the time, as the burning of the Peel by Pirate Johnson and all that. Well, it turns out that shipwreck's still there. It's in 140 feet of water, middle of the channel. And its significance is that during the Gulf War, the United States used the British attacking the Caroline as a preemptive strike as the justification for invading Iraq. So the history of the Peel is tied to significant events of the time. It's also celebrated every year as the Pirates Weekend in Alexandria Bay, where they've been celebrating the burning of the Peel for 100 years or so. So we'll go on and get Tim's interest up. When I first started diving, we got involved in Revolutionary War ship, and I was involved in a group to do research. And we decided there were so few ships at that time where we would identify the ship we had by eliminating it from other ships at the time. Well, in this process, we discovered a court of inquiry in the sinking of a vessel called the Anson in the Thousand Islands, 20 leagues below Kingston, in what was called the Narrows. Well, we were told to go look at Jefferson Community College, and there was a cannon there, and on the plaque It talks about divers finding in 1960 and raising it up off Niagara Shoal. But we weren't aware of the divers or what was going on at the time, so we decided to look to see what was on Niagara Shoal. This is the buoy that marks Niagara Shoal. It's water's about 5 foot deep, and it's right directly next to the main shipping channel. And what we found was there was a shipwreck on Niagara Shoal. And this was taken, we saw it in the 1970s, it was taken in the 1990s. At the time, it was intact enough that and the visibility was enough, I swam almost under the side, came around and found a keel, or a rudder, worked my way up the stem of the ship, the rudder, onto the quarterdeck. And all I remember, the quarterdeck was all around it. I'd never seen anything like it. My regulator almost dropped out. I'd never seen a ship that looked like this other than old ships. Well, it turns out this was the Iroquois, which was built in Maitland, Ontario. It was captured in the siege of Isle Royale by the British, renamed the Anson. And in the year after, the British, at that time, these ships were under the Army, not the Navy. It was a number of British Army soldiers were sailing it. And on one of his trips to the Thousand Island, it ran into Niagara Shoal and sunk. What we did is, realizing the significance, we organized a not-for-profit corporation to apply for a permit. We had the chief archaeologist of the province of Ontario that wanted us to do this. The diving across river here, both sides know each other. It turns out Ontario had known of the Anson Iroquois. They thought it was in Brown Bay. They raised wreck over was there. They really didn't know where it was. It was a significant shipwreck to Canada. We could get nobody in New York State interested in this. It was not. It was before the Revolutionary War. That's great. We found it. We don't want to know about it. So we had the head archaeologist for the province of Ontario. We had a support person by the name of Nick Rule that he got a hold of for us, whose mother was Margaret Rule, who excavated the Mary Rose in England for the royal family. And we did a 3-year program where we went down and essentially measured the remains and documented everything that was down there. We didn't recover anything because, quite frankly, it had been recovered before us. The cannons and other things were already taken out. We produced enough information to detail what the hall, the spacing hall, and the archaeologist in Canada was very tough on it. Well, we have to prove beyond reasonable doubt somehow that it's the Iroquois, and all you got is a bunch of timbers. It had metal fasteners, not wood fasteners. It turned out we shared this information with an admiral in France that wrote a book on French vessels in this time period. And he came back and says, it's amazing. Your frame spacing is exactly every 2 imperial French feet. At which point I said, what's an imperial French feet? Well, it turned out the measurement system of France at that time was different than the English system. And that spacing would have been what the French naval architects used to build the ship. So the vessel was undoubtedly the Iroquois. And this is a drawing that was done of it. There's a question on the sail plan that we had an artist do the drawing, and he insisted on using a sail plan from another drawing, but that's probably totally incorrect. But it turns out the vessel was launched 1759, Point O'Brill, which is Maitland, Ontario. The ship's designer, the captain, Rene Henry Laforce was the captain of it. It turns out he was a character that was head of the entire French Navy during the French and Indian War on Lake Ontario. 50-foot keel, 20-foot beam, and it had, during the siege of Niagara, it actually fired on the British troops. They fired so much that they opened up frames in the hull, and they had to place cannons in the hull to hold the frames together. And this was found that the 3 cannons removed from the hull. of which I know, of which I've been trying to find a historical site, take one, because we know where it is, and it's available, but what pressure. Okay, the other historical record, let's keep moving on, was that we started out doing the research on was in a wreck that was in North Bay of Carlton Island.
Off Cape Vincent.
Off Cape Vincent. This time, French Indian War, end of the French Indian War to end of the Revolution War, the two most important places up here was Fort Oswegatchie, which is Fort of Presentation, and Carlton Island during the Revolution. After that Revolutionary War, the peace treaties, Carlton Island, everything was taken on, they could move, was taken to Kingston, became Kingston, Ontario. Oswegatchie, we know the story about it being on the outside of the border and becoming U.S. Well, in 1810, the British still occupied certain areas on this side of the border. They hadn't acknowledged that Carlton Island wasn't a U.S. property. The British government, army, they did a survey, they went out and drew and did maps of a lot of fortifications and did inventory of what was there. Well, on this map they did in 1810 Carlton Island, they indicate a wreck, nothing out here, just earthworks. And New York State actually knew about this wreck for a number of years. But in 1973, two divers using a metal detector in North Bay, Carlton Island, found what they thought was an iron pot sticking out of the mud. Turned out the iron pot was the muzzle of a cannon. Luckily, the head of Fort Ontario, Wally Workmaster, New York State Parks at the time, somehow got in touch with the divers got in touch with him, and he organized a relationship with the New York State Divers Association, took out a permit to do further excavation, and look for cannons and joint with New York State. And the reason that this started is these divers not only found this cannon, they found a large metal target that was in the shipwreck, and they weren't sure what it was, so New York State finally wanted to do a survey. Then it got bizarre as they got into it. Monies were funded from National Science and other people were brought in. And the first half, the divers essentially did the same thing, got a map, identification of the ship, how they put a grid in, were done, and they were actually, through the dimensions on this is where we got into how we could identify the ship was. When they were found the Iroquois and they were actually looking for this ship. There's a lot of story behind this, but I'll cut down short. What's in North Bay, Carlton Island is a vessel called the Helderman. The Helderman was built in 1771 at Oswegatchie on the point where Fort of Presentation is. At the time, it was between the wars. The French Indian War had ended in 1760. The Revolutionary War hadn't started. There were 17 major vessels built for the French Indian War. By 1765, all 17 vessels had either been sunk, abandoned, or were set up into decay. There was one vessel built for Lake Ontario, and that was also, it was built in Oswego, but there's a picture of it at Oswegatchie in the harbor. And by 1771, it was needed to be replaced. The British government put a contract out where a contractor from New York City built this ship at Ogdensburg, had to bring everything in, all the rope cordage, and it was in the archives is details what the fasteners were all brought up there. When the British took control of the vessel from the contractor, there's a letter that the British Navy officer signed that this by far is the best vessel I've seen. It's better than anything can be, or comparable to anything can be produced in any of the King's naval yards in England or Ireland or the US at that time. This ship still exists, It sits 50 miles from Ogdensburg. There's I'll show you a website later. There's 1,000+ artifacts that were recovered from it. They're in the State Museum in Albany. They're loanable to accredited museums that want to bring displays out and have them on this vessel. And it still exists today. With the up and coming 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, there's not a whole lot of ships around that still exist. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is the original, not get off track, the original point is to give everybody a feel for what are the ships that are in the Thousand Islands. So I'm going to switch now away from those three and talk about vessels and what they look like with some pictures of them. This is Shipwreck that's located in the American Narrows off Rock Island Light. It was built in 3 Mile Bay, New York. It's called the A.E. Vickery. It was actually started out as named the Penfield. 3-masted schooner built on the shores of Chabot Bay. This is a picture showing the local dive club in Clayton have buoyed wreck. They do this out of their own money. They buoy the wrecks so that people don't drag or anchor into it to protect them. And there's a picture of the buoy right up from Rock Island Lighthouse. This is a side scan image of the shipwreck placed into a satellite image that shows you where it is relative to shore. There's the lighthouse, and you can see 2 dive boats that were in the image, and that sets that close to shore, 100 to 120 feet of water. Nobody, boats go over, you have no idea it's there unless you see the thing. This is a picture of its bow, a diver on a scooter coming up to it. You can actually see the bow of the ship and part of the railing still in place. This is one of the premier shipwrecks out there. The railing, this is a massive vessel. You don't realize until you're underwater, you have everything. The railing is solid timbers this big. And just to find something like this today is almost impossible. This is a picture looking down on the bow. That's the windlass, the winch that would be used for raising, lowering sails or whatever else. It's still sitting on the wreck. You can see the deterioration where the zebra mussels are starting to really destroy the wrecks. And the scientists said, well, zebra mussels don't hurt wood. Well, they clamp onto the wood, grow a big column, they pull a little bit of wood off. Clamp on the wood, pull a little wood off, pull a little wood off. So it's beginning. Our fear, there's nothing can be done about it, is that this thing, you'll be able to see through it when we go on in another 20, 30 years. This is a photograph of the Vickery at 120 feet, looking up at the stern of the vessel. And you can see where some of the wood has already come off. Not all timber on these ships were made out of the same, mostly oak, but a lot of it was red cedar and other timbers that actually would dissolve quicker. Another one of the wrecks that are out there is one of the last 4 commercial sailing ships on Lake Ontario, the Magiel. It sits off Clayton, New York. If you ever, ABM's down here and restaurants here, well, right out from there. And you also see, this is the main channel, is where the wreck is located, in about 80 feet of water. Now, we've gotten into recently doing digital images, where you take a camera down, you take a videotape of the whole thing, you bring it up, and you put it in a computer, and the computer actually spits out a 3D model. Well, this is a computer image that we did, because you can't see this when you're swimming on it, of the Magiel. Magiel was sunk by the Key State when it hit the bow, and you can actually see the decking in place and the bows just sheared off. So you can actually see, this is like 1929, so there's some underwater pictures there. You get a good idea, but you can't see the whole ship or the whole part. What's interesting is the ship's name still on a nameplate. And it's one of the few things that when divers first got into diving in the 60s and 70s, they took everything off the bottom. They found it was theirs, they took it. Well, it's technically illegal. You can't take things off the shipwreck. Well, somehow they missed the nameplate. It was covered by whatever moss at the time, so this is one of the few ships that still has its name on it. You can't see it because you have to clean it off, which technically is legal to clean it off the sea. So, but it is there. This is the vessel earlier that I showed that was raised and moved out in Sycar's ship called the Islander, steamship, sidewheel steamer. It's sunk right off Cornwall Brothers Store, which is nice because it's their town museum, so they have a shipwreck outside. At times they've had cameras on the wreck for divers. And Alexandria Bay does a great job of providing a dive park and parking and a pavilion for divers to change their clothes in. So they really have worked nicely with the diving community. This is the bow of the Islander. Now, you just can't imagine how massive these are. You start to see when you see the size of a person versus these timbers that are sitting out there. They're very large vessels. You can feel for that. That happens to be I think the closet for the side wheel. That's where one of the side wheels would have gone. Again, this is the one that was raised and everything of value was pulled out of it. Another interesting wreck is something called the America. If you've ever been to Singer Island, Singer Castle, right off there's a shipwreck that is in the middle of basically middle of the channel. Dark Island, not Singer Island. But there's this buoy out here and the island here. This is the side can of America where it's been placed where it would be in the channel. This was a drill barge that was drilling shoals and it exploded. I don't know how many people were killed on it.
9 or something. Could have been worse.
Now, this is one of the reasons why the Thousand Island may not have been included in the proposed Lake Ontario sanctuary. This vessel is only a few feet below the top of the channel, 28, 29, 28 feet, whatever the minimum distance is. A diver to access this vessel actually has to do it timed when there's no freighters coming through because you're exposed, actually shower that part of the access coming out. Right now there's no regulations on diving under the Seaway Channel. The Coast Guard wanted regulations to ban all diving under the Seaway Channel. The NOAA, they had another thing, New York State Historic Presentation, and I guess they did the best solution. This February they withdrew adding the Thousand Islands into the sanctuary proposal because of all the problems of the fact that the Thousand Islands, the seaway is more important as a navigation supply chain should there be an accident where a freighter does something, either kills a person or does something and sinks and has toxic chemicals. So they withdrew the Thousand Islands as part of the designation as a national maritime park, even though the Thousand Islands has a better shipwrecks than Lake Ontario. There's another picture you can see. This is the rudder, the prop, this huge metal hull. The explosion was so big it blew it right out of the water and upside down on the deck, or on the rocks. This is a shipwreck, St. Louis. It's in Cape Vincent, New York. It's right out of East Line Park, and it's wooden, dates from the Civil War time period. It sits, if you've ever been to Cape Vincent, there's a nice little park pavilion. Nobody realizes there's a 200-foot long ship setting right offshore.
Except right now, it's
Right.
all under construction.
Yeah, they're rebuilding the boat ramp during gas season, but that's another story. Here's some pictures. These again are massive. It was converted from a propeller packet steamer to a barge. They put 2-foot square timbers, lined the bottom, and they loaded it with sand on Wolf Island. They brought sand around to, I don't know where, but it was, and then eventually in about 15, so they docked at Cape Vincent, and when he left it there, it just deteriorated on the shore. That's one of the other things we do. We got involved with Cape Vincent Dive Club and did the signage. This is an aerial photograph of the park, and you can actually see the wreck right there. And this is a poster that Jeff was involved in getting
This is
done.
an actual poster like they have
For the
for the presentation where you're walking, and you can walk up to the
Signage worked with the town on it. The Roy Jodry, the newest diveable major shipwreck. This vessel is 700 feet long. 1974, it hit Pullman Shoal, which is up in this area. It started taking on water, so they turned it around, they tied it to the Coast Guard dock. And 700 feet is about that far in here. And the night that they tied it to the dock, it sunk. It slid down the shoal. And it sits in 250 to about 120 feet of water. And you take a boat down there, you have an idea you're going over the top of one of these big freighters. It's sitting right below in very strong currents. This is a picture of the bridge taken by divers. For a number of years, diving out was prohibited because it was leaking oil. And they finally gave the go-ahead for divers 15 years ago. This is a picture of the smokestack. You can see the bear for the trademark of the company, and you can see the picture there to give you a feel for it. And this diver is that far above the river and probably 120 feet underwater. And again, this is tech diving. Talking about it, the diver has multiple tanks on, and that's where this is where the number of divers have died mainly through heart attacks, where they're over stressing. Because it's so stressful to them. You're in different atmospheres, and compression at that point is 3 to 4 times the atmosphere on the surface. The mixture of gas and nitrogen in there is disproportionate. It's physically demanding, so it's not something that's a casual, learn to scuba dive on a weekend and go out there. This is months of training. But the Jodry's been one.
It's a Mount Everest to divers.
They train Navy SEALs on it. The dive center in Alex, it's not uncommon to have Navy SEALs in training on this wreck because it's the one located close to shore. It's known, it's very deep, it's very challenging. And go back now, one of the other wrecks, the O'Connell. This one I showed earlier, it was partially salvaged before it sunk. It sits 140 feet on Granite State Shoal across from the lighthouse on Rock Island. And here's a picture, 1886. And this vessel is coming up, shoal comes up very steep. It hit bow first, okay? And you can see there's the hull. This was a part of the siding that could be removed and accessed, like the first deck. There's the ship's anchors are there, and you can see the size of the person. Here's another picture of it when it sunk. This is the tug Conqueror that was in the other picture, and this is the bow sticking out of water. Again, hit bow first. And if we look at Rock Island Light, we have the Victory here, we have the Iroquois here, we have the Robert Peel there. So again, it's almost under Dead Center Channel. This is a photograph taking of it. It shows these anchors. Well, these anchors are nothing like shown in the picture, so we believe the anchors actually were from salvage attempts because there was at least 3 to 4 attempts to salvage the vessel. This is a photograph of the bow section of what's down there with these 2 anchors hanging off it. Well, we don't think that the O'Connell is the only shipwreck down there. We've taken a side scan in, and we have roughly 350 feet of hull that we can identify in 4 different sections of side scan. But the Econo is only 120 foot long. This particular wreck, and then here's one of the hull sections, the props knocked off from hitting the shoal. Well, there's no evidence that the Econo ever hit the shoal on the prop, they hit it by the bow. It was, the stern would have been in hundreds of feet of water while the engine was running. So, we were in Thousand Island Museum one day, and this person came in and said, I got a model of a ship that my grandfather made. Grandfather was shipwright, and he saw this ship sink on Granite State Shoal. He made a model of it, and it was so detailed. He got a little steam engine in it.
And they used to float it.
That was called
the Fanny.
the Fanny. And we looked, we can't find any record on it. Well, we got him to donate the model to the museum. It's in the museum now. And we started looking at the model he made of the Fanny, and it has this very unique structure right in the very bow. Well, here's the picture of the wreck that's underwater. It has the same thing. Here's the picture of the Econo that is the known wreck down there. It's not the same. So we can't find the insurance records or the documentation on it, but we do believe that there's multiple shipwrecks there, and that a person walking in the museum that had the model, had the story from his grandfather, helped identify this, that you don't realize where the information comes from. But any little bit of information somebody says, well, my father or parents remembered this, listen to them. It might be worthwhile. Down to the end now. The other wreck down by Dark Island, Keystone. Keystone's a metal hull freighter. It sank in 1912, I believe. This is a side scan of it. Being metal hulls, unlike the wooden ships, it's not deteriorating. You can actually see the deck, what we call wings, or the structure up at the bow above the main cabin. And you can see the holes down the bottom. It goes from about 40 feet to 120 feet. These are some pictures on it. And these are well-known dive sites for the scuba diving community. There's a picture that way, and this is the one we didn't get to. This is so close to Canada that the Canadians actually once claimed it was their wreck. It wasn't an American wreck. And we had an instance where a charter operator called us and said, hey, I've got people taking artifacts off the Keystone. What can I do? I said, well, call New York State Education Department. Well, they'll tell you what to do. So they called New York State, and the guy calls from back, he goes, New York State says it's not in the U.S., it's in Canada. So no, it's not, it is in Canada. Let me get a hold of it. So I contacted New York State. I won't name the person. And she said, well, in that case, if it's really in the U.S., call the state police. So I called the local state police and I said, look, we've got a report that there's parts of the Keystone being taken out, and the person that saw them said they were loading stuff into a truck at Shimmerhorn Landing, and the truck had Massachusetts state plates on it, so they'd be going out of state. So the state police said, well, I'm sorry, we don't have any time to go look at this because we're tied up with a joint New York State, Massachusetts dive training session. So we can't start everybody to look at this. So since then, the American divers keep putting flags on it, and the Canadians take them off. Okay, that kind of concludes, or this hopefully is giving you an idea of what's out there, why it's out there. If you want to see more, we have a website called ti3ds.com. And we have a map. You can go on the map, and we have about half the shipwrecks done as a digital model. We can actually look at, you can click on the site and come up, and the ship will there, and you can rotate and look around on the ship, and then the stories and most on what the ship is basically on there.
I put our business cards here in the website.
And we also have a number of books we've written. Shipwrecks of the Thousand Islands, essentially actually fisherman market, because it tells where the wrecks are. But it gives you a background on all the wrecks that are out there that we know about, basic history, enough information. If it's something want more information, you can contact the Thousand Island Museum or there's a lot on the internet. And we have something, we talk about fleet of lost ships. The American Narrows by Wellesley Island, back in the 1890s, there was a newspaper reporter who talked about the people in skiffs coming up from the summer and rowing across all these sunken ships, which he said was like a fleet of lost ships. Well, nothing's changed. You got people coming up in the summer and driving boats up and down the river over the top of the same fleet of lost ships. So we put together a little book that just identifies what's down there. So, any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, are there any ships that during abolition that were smuggling alcohol into the United States? Is that so?
Yeah.
The comment on that was, somebody asked the kid in the Clayton Museum what a bootlegger boat looked like, and all the elderly at the table said, well, we kept it under the seat, we kept it in the back. And the comment was that if it was on the river, it was a bootlegger.
I just wondered if there are any, there must be boats.
Yeah, there's one we can't find. There was a small boat that I call myself second generation divers. There's first divers went out in 1960, 59, when they found all this stuff. And then by the time we got into it, it was in the mid-70s, so a lot of those people, not around or can't find them. They used to tell me about one that was a skiff that was just absolutely full of crates of liquor that was sitting off Zenda Farms. And we've looked for it, we've side scanned for it, so somebody must have got it. Recently, there was a wreck found just outside of Tibbetts Point that was about a steam launch, no, it was a gas launch, and it was full of bottles of something. I don't know what I never went out there and tested them, but they call it the rum runner. The name of the wreck, because you can't find the actual real name for it, they call it the rum runner. And apparently, talking to the ex-mayor Tim Mahoney, he said that point was known for bringing boats in and loading things on and off and bringing in. So outside, there's bottles all over the bottom of St. Lawrence, so whether they threw them out back as they were coming in, we hear people talk about they had lanterns and buildings, and if there was two lights, they would come in with a boat, one light, they were not to come in and get rid of whatever's on board. The newspaper clippings are very interesting articles because the revenue boats were authorized at the time. If they wanted a boat to stop, they could fire a shot across this bottom. If they didn't stop, they could fire a shot at the boat, this was 1920s and 30s. I mean, it's like, I don't think I'd go out there now and have somebody shoot at you. So,
They were serious,
the rum runner is the most specific one that we know 99% sure that was bootleg related. The other ones, it was hard to tell. They probably were used, and even where we live on our point, we find out later that it was a rum point where there was a church on Wolf Island, and they kept stuff in the church, and we were off between Cape Vincent and Clay, we're near Cedar Point down there, and the only good place to bring a boat in was an area of rock they called Blue Ledge, where you boats right up to shore. And her parents, when they first rented there in the 30s, they would hear trucks or lights come at night and they'd go out to that part of the boat where they weren't going to hear a lot of noise, and one would be gone, just tire tracks around. So I assumed that it was that.
And Skipper's grandfather count the hooks that
Yeah.
she put a lantern out if they weren't,
Yeah, Skip says just put a lantern out if they weren't to come in.
if they weren't
So,
to come in.
it's not something that's documented. It's hard to find other than details. I think there's a talk that we gave this year to ABM, or going to be talking.
Yeah, they got a talk here coming
Yeah,
up.
was that book out?
Oh, yeah, and I think, Jeff,
There's-
what's Jeff's last name?
There's a book written by one of our neighbors called Bernie or Bootlegger.
Bernie, you're a bootlegger.
But he was out of Rochester, involved in Niagara, And they seemed, for some reason, they came up here and
He knew about
he
Blue
knew
Ledge,
about where,
so he
where
bought
to build a
property
cottage and
there.
where things are coming across from Wolf Island. So,
There's a talk at the Thousand Island Museum, Jeff is giving one on bootlegging in the Thousand Islands. I don't know when, but I know it's the summer.
and our first display that went in the Thousand Island Museum
Yeah.
as a last minute thought, because Thousand Island Museum brings all the school
School
kids in.
kids in.
They go through the museum. Well, they were setting up and planning a display on bootlegging. And I don't know who said it, somebody looked, I said, are we gonna let these kids all see the fact our grandparents were the ones? We can't have this display, so they called, look, can you do a shipwreck display, because we don't think we want to put the bootleg display up. So, sure, I'll put the display. So, any other questions?
Yes, how much boat building was done in Thousand Islands? It sounded like, I mean, they
A
built
lot.
big ships, I mean, what I
They're all
would
the way to
consider
World War
big ships.
II.
Yeah,
Clayton's had,
well,
But
PT
3 Mile,
boats.
you
They
said
did-
3 Mile
they-
Bay, how did they, I mean, were these actual really well-designed boat works? Or was it like, you know, the one ship you talked about, they had the contractor who came up and,
yeah.
did they have
Well-
facilities there to build boats or what?
What they had was the raw timber. Okay, and maybe the best way to explain it is that 3 Mile Bay, which is down off Chinook Bay, they built 150, 200 three-masted schooners.
Oh, wow.
But it turns out they built them on the shore, they built them out in Blue Island. And the reason they built them on the shore is they wanted to be the shortest distance from the oak and the other big trees they had to drag over and use. That the skills of the shipwrights went with them, and the fact they had to bring in fittings and iron and ropes. Well, maybe once they got the hull floated, they took it into a different location to put the masts and the rigging on it. But the shipwreck building itself, there's not one big facility where they built ships. It was all over the place where they could get the timber to. They even did in Sackets Harbor. They built the New Orleans and Sackets Harbor, and the other ship that was almost as big, they built in Stores Harbor, because they'd run out of getting timbers into Sackets Harbor. That was the biggest issue, is how you they didn't have excavators or anything. These things were ox carts and moved around. And Thousand Islands, there's a number of ships built in Clayton, Cape Vincent, even the Alexandria Bay, but I think those are smaller. They weren't the large, like sailing vessels. During the French and Indian War, the original French shipbuilding was in Kingston, was in Frontenac, or Kingston. When Niagara, and maybe even Niagara, when Niagara was lost to the British, Frontenac was lost to 1758 to Bread Street. They moved the shipbuilding center back to Point of Brill, which is really basically Maitland, Ontario. They built 3 ships in 1760 over the winter, brought everything up from Montreal to build them, and the timber was all up here. And then the British built some ships in Oswego, and then when they basically took over New France, the British headquarters started out for ships on Lake Ontario, started out on Isle Royale. That was where the Navy actually made their actual, brought in the British naval officers, and that's where they brought the ships down. Isle Royale being very difficult. I can't imagine trying to bring a sailing ship. Got Tim to say something.
Tell them where Isle Royale is, or the
Okay.
modern name, to give an idea where it's
Chimney
located.
Island.
Off
If
Lisbon.
you go, it's right below the,
Yeah, it's
What is
just
it?
below
That
the bridge,
or
and
something.
if you go across the bridge, you'll see off to your right, going toward Canada, you see this island that's all grown up and abandoned. That's
Yeah.
where the fort and the shipyard was.
and they quickly, it operated for a few years, and I think they quickly switched back to what became Fort Oswegatchie, was for representation. And they built the new ship in there, which was the only ship built from there were only 2 ships built from 1761 to 1771, so they built in there. And then during the Revolutionary War, they moved the shipbuilding to Carlton Island, because I think they finally got tired of bringing these 3-masted, or these big ships down through the Narrows, and they actually lost the Anson in the Narrows. So the naval yard was transferred to Carlton Island. End of the Revolutionary War was transferred to Kingston. And the shipbuilding in the U.S. really didn't pick up till the 1830s and 40s. You start small ships, and then by the 1850s it was mass scale. And I think once they ran out of timber, that was it. You had your supply oak and cut it all down, and you didn't have enough timber to keep this up. There is this Colonel Gray's map I showed you. It shows Carlton Island, Fort Hellman. Within 50 miles, other than where was Kingston, there was nothing. Everything was wilderness. Well, when he did the map, on the shore across, he shows a big area of cleared timber. And if you look at Google Earth, you can see timber right out in front of where that was. We think that was where they were after a while for the major ships that were being built in Carlton. We think that's where they cut the timber and brought up to Carlton Island. And at whatever point they stopped and left a whole bunch on shore, seaway's been raised, and you have this oak. If you take a piece of it, harden it with linseed oil, it's called bog oak. It's brown, and it's 20 to 25 rings per inch versus modern oak, which is like 10 rings per inch. So it's probably the remnants of the treeing operation or the logging operation that supplied all the ships that were built in Carlton Island. And then Henderson Harbor is a massive shipbuilding. And
How much you said that the seaway raised the
well, these
water
bog
level
oaks
up?
are about 5 feet underwater.
Okay.
It's depending on what year and which water level.
Yeah,
So
that's one sure.
why would you have all these? They're not finished into squared lumber. There are trees that are cut. And they remove the branches on them. They're going. You can see them on Google Earth. Some of them are that round, 40 foot long. Other than being on the shore, why would they leave them in the water? So I really don't know that much about the site, but we're assuming, from what we hear on some of the ship's log, the seaway did vary quite a bit. So it might, I don't know. I can't. That's a good question. I don't
Well, I was
know.
wondering, I mean, before the seaway was in, just getting ships in and out, up and down the St. Lawrence must have been a terror.
Well, we have the.
I mean, especially, I'm sure that the level rose and fell depending on the season, right?
We had the Court of Inquiry for the sinking of the Anson, Iroquois Anson, where everybody on board was interrogated on what happened when they lost. I mean, it's a big offense to lose a capital ship. And the pilot says, I have no idea, and we don't know how well the pilot went into the river. Basically, he goes, we came through here in the spring, we had no problem crossing the water in the same place. And this time we hit a shoal 5 feet under.
Yeah.
So they didn't have this concept that, I mean, that's right in the Court of Inquiry. He didn't understand that the river's going to vary, that much. So, that was 1761, the first ship that hit a shoal. They had the wrong sails on it, steered wildly at all times. It was crewed by Army soldiers, not naval soldiers. So, I mean, it's a wonder they got these things anyways. But,
What happened to all the other ships? If there were hundreds of ships built, and there's only a few that are sunk, compared to how many were built, did they salvage? Did they tear ships apart to build new ships? Or did they?
They didn't, there was a ship sunk on Isle Royale again, called the Onondaga during the battle in 1760. There's a letter from a couple years later of an officer at Fort Oswegatchie apologizing to his commanding officer. We took the Onondaga apart for its fasteners. We needed to build a warehouse, and there's no material that we can get a hold of, so we disassembled the ship and built this warehouse out of the bits and pieces from it. Now, over time, it probably got, as ships went to wood and metal, it probably got less important than the sailing ships, but we know at least in the Onondaga, they disassembled the whole ship and used every bit of it, because you didn't have Lowe's down the street. You wanted something that came out of Montreal, or came up the Mohawk or wherever, and it took a while.